Okay, so we're back for part two with David, and we left off with he had a great electronics business, grew, and then he looked like Rock Hudson, so wanted to become a movie star. Out west we go to California, I assume.
So this is before the interstate highways. So I got my car loaded down. Oh, and by the way, it was the only car that I ever loved. It was 49 Merc. I had all customized, and so it's loaded down. I'm heading across country, and I get to Paris, Texas, and I blew the engine.
And you
And-
probably didn't have the money to fix it.
Well, when I left Miami, I had $200. I was going to make the trip with $200, and I had about $300, I guess. And I gave $200. I didn't want to carry a lot of money on me, so I gave $200 to my father, and he gave me a check for $200, so that when I would cash it when I got to California. It was stupid. I didn't want to carry there was too much money to carry. I had enough money to pay for gas. Well, I break down in Paris, middle of the night, and I pull up in front of a junk car lot. And I slept in the car, and some friends had given me an old moth-eaten jacket, and a long coat, because it was cold, going to be cold where I was going. And I had a cowboy hat, and I hadn't shaved in 3 or 4 days. And so I pull in front of this car place. Next morning, they had a car of 1950 Plymouth Coupe, a little small car, and the price was $200. And so I asked them if I told them I wanted to buy the car, but they wouldn't take my check. So I had to go to the local bank, and I got this moth-eaten wool coat, cowboy hat, no shave.
You look like something off the Most
I
Wanted
walked in
poster.
like they looked at me like I was there to rob the bank. It's like an old Western movie, you know?
Yeah.
And they wouldn't cash the check, someone took me to Western Union, and I was able to get my father to wire me Western Union $200. So I go back and I buy the car. Now I got the car loaded down with all my possessions that I'm not going to leave, so I took a chain and I chained the bumpers together. Now, I'm not talking about a towing bar and all. I'm talking about a chain connected to 2 bumpers. And I take off with this little light Plymouth, pulling this loaded down, heavy Mercury convertible. And I have an uncle in Albuquerque, New Mexico, 1,000 miles away. And I'm going to tow this car to Albuquerque. And I take off, and I'm going. And it was okay on a straight road, but when you went up a hill, sometimes I didn't think I was going to make it up the hill with all the weight behind me. I'd have to put it in first gear and just barely make it up. And then when I came down the hill, the bumpers, the car behind me would hit the bumper, and I'm going like this. And one time, this is crazy, one time I'm on the wrong side of the road. Most of the roads were like 2-lane roads back then. And I'm on the wrong side of the road, out of control, and a police car had to swerve on the other side of the road to go past me. And to this day, I don't know why they didn't come after me, but I guess they somewhere they had to be. Well, anyway, after 3 or 4 days, I made it to Albuquerque, pulling this car. And I mean, by all rights, I should have been killed. And whenever I made a turn, it was like the heavy car would push the small car all the way. But I made it to Albuquerque, and my uncle had a porta-john business. He used to build these porta-johns out of wood and take them on his trucks and take them to sites. They didn't have aluminum or fiberglass like they have today. And he had a fenced-in yard. So I pulled my 49 Mercury into the yard, and I decided that I'm going to overhaul the engine. And I never overhauled an engine in my life, and it was freezing cold. And I put it up on blocks, and I would go run out there with a wrench, and I would take a nut off of the crankcase and have to run in. He had a big pot-bellied stove, and I'd run in, cool, warm up and run back out, take another screw. And I took the entire engine apart down to, just a block.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to the Ford dealer, and I was able to buy pistons and rings and valves and all that. And I put it all back together. It took me weeks to do this. And then I went to crank it up. Nothing happened.
Would it turn over?
Wouldn't turn over. So I called the Ford dealer and I said what I did. They said, well, when you put the parts in, you greased them all, right? Well, I didn't know about that. I had to go back out and take everything apart again, grease it all up, put them back together. And when I cranked it up, it started, but it was missing and popping. And
So let me ask you, when I was a little boy, when I was 16, 17, I got a car, a 1971 Oldsmobile, and I blew the engine. And I decided to rebuild it myself because I had no money. And I took it apart, and I got it all put back together, and it wouldn't start. It would sound like it wanted to start, and it wouldn't start. So I towed it with a rope up to the local gas station. And I asked the mechanic, I said, what did I do wrong? He looks at it, and he said, then you had to adjust timing. And my timing was off. And they adjusted the timing on it, and it ran perfectly.
well, you greased the parts when you put them in.
I did.
I didn't. So then I got the guy from Ford to come over, and the only thing wrong, because I didn't know anything about timing, the only thing wrong, I had two spark plugs crossed, and he fixed it, and the thing ran purred like a kitten. And so now I got a car running. I sold the Plymouth that I towed for $200, and I got my $200 back. But of course I needed that to pay for the parts. And I take off for California. I figured I wore my welcome with my aunt and uncle. And I'm 30 miles outside of Albuquerque, and my car's overheating. And fortunately, it was like desert. Fortunately, there was a creek. Like 40, 50 feet down, there was a creek. So I have to put water in the radiator. Oh, I have nothing to carry it in. I had a cardboard suitcase. And I emptied the suitcase, and I climbed down this embankment. I filled the suitcase full of water, and I dragged it back up the embankment. By the time I got to the top, half of it had leaked out. I put it in the car. Anyway, I finally got the car filled with water, took off again, and it started to overheat again. So I saw a closed up gas station, and I pulled in, and they had in the back, they had this big bucket where they used to take tires, and stick them in there to see if they had a leak, where the leak was. So I took their big tub. I took this front seat of my car out, or it was split seat, and I put the tub where the seat was, and every time I pulled in to get gas, I fill up the tub. So here people would look at me, and I'm pulling the water hose into the car, filling up the tub. They thought my car ran on water.
So you filled it with water and stopped every now and then and kept putting water
Every
in it?
30 miles, all the way. I finally, and I mean, this was such a pain. Of course, I knew as soon as it started to overheat, I didn't wait for it to, blow in the
Right.
geyser. And so I finally made it to San Bernardino, California, which is about 50 miles from LA. And it's like midnight, and I'm exhausted. I haven't slept, and I'm so tired. Every 30 miles, I had to stop and fill up this car. And I pull into a all-night gas station, and it had a mechanic. It's like midnight. I said, I told him what was happening. I said, would you look at it? The guy says, no problem, I'll fix it. He comes out with a torque wrench, and he tightened the head, the bolts on the head, just with a torque wrench. I didn't know what torque wrench
So
was.
is water getting out of the head?
Water was leaking. So he did that and never had a leak again. But I wish I had known that, in Albuquerque. But I was ignorant because I didn't know what I was doing. But then I drove to LA and I had the car out there for 2 years. So now I arrive in LA with $10.50 in my pocket. I have no place to stay, don't know anybody, and I'm hungry. I found a rooming house for $10 a week. I gave him $10. I had a place to stay for a week. And I took the 50 cents that I had left over, and I bought a quart of milk and a pint of cottage cheese. And that was my dinner. And I knew when I went to bed, I knew the next day I was going to have to get a job in a restaurant because
You get paid immediately.
you get tips and you get food. So the next day I went out and I found a restaurant, a drive-in restaurant on Wilshire Boulevard. And I get a job. There, and I got fed. Well, it was a round building, and there were all male car hops. And since this is for publication, I won't tell you any more about that.
Okay.
They were all male car hops. And they stuck me in the very back by the dumpsters. And all these, it was near UCLA, and all the UCLA girls would come in, and when they saw that there was a straight guy working in the back, they all started coming to me. They would wait in line, whereas the rest of the stations weren't getting any business. So after a week, the manager said, I'm sorry, but I got to fire you or else everybody's going to quit. But by that time, I kind of enjoyed what I was doing, so I went to another drive-in at the corner of Westwood Boulevard in Wilshire, and it was like a Morton Steakhouse with a drive-in section. I mean, we served New York strip steaks and pecan pie and shrimp cocktails, and I had all the movie stars coming in. Ricardo Montalban and all these movie stars and actresses from Beverly Hills all came in. And so I'm working there, and I started taking voice lessons and acting lessons, and I did a couple of screen tests, and I got an agent, and he said, I need to get my portfolio made. I had to get my pictures done. I found out who Rock Hudson's photographer was. He lived in the Hollywood Hills. And I went to him, made an appointment, went to him one night, and he said, what do you need these pictures for? And I said, well, for my agent, I'm going to be a movie star. And he said, no, you're not. He said, you look too much like Rock Hudson.
We already have a Rock Hudson.
And he said, you'll never see two stars that look alike. He said, you want to be his double or his stand-in, but you'll never be a star. Well, that just popped my bubble. And so after that, I quit, and I got a job as a TV repairman for a company, and I the first day I went out and on a service call, and the plug had fallen out of the wall. And I plug it in, the TV's working fine, and people thanked me very much. And I went back, and the owner of the store said, well, what happened? And I said, well, it was just the plug had fallen out. I plugged it back in, it worked fine. He fired me because I was too honest. Back in those days, TV was a racket. So I saw an ad in the paper for a lineman for Southern Cal Edison. So my claim to fame is that I put in the first power lines in Malibu. There were some stilt houses in Malibu, but the mountain across the road from the ocean was undeveloped, but there was no power. And I worked for Southern Cal Edison. I put in the first power lines in Malibu. And I put my spikes on it, and I'd climb up these poles, and now even that helped me later on. I'll tell you in a minute, but after I was not well liked because my crew were married guys, and I was the only single guy in the crew, and they would come to work at their lunch pail, and they'd have a bologna sandwich or a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and all, and I'm single, and I'm making fried chicken and pecan pie, and I got this gourmet lunch.
So you're making money.
They finally, one of the company execs called me up, or came by and see me. He said the guys on your crew would appreciate it if you went to eat lunch with them. And so they were afraid to tell me themselves because afraid I might drop something on them. I'm up 40 feet, 50 feet in the air. So anyway, but this was not going anywhere. So finally I decided to come back to Florida. But I have this car out there, and I'm not going to drive it back because after that experience. So I live in an apartment, 3940 Sepulveda, in Culver City, where MGM Studio is. I mean, I'm making good money, and I got a nice apartment, hot and cold, running women all the time. And a good friend of mine lived there too. He said, let's go get a beer. There's a little bar across the street. He said, let's go get a beer. So I go with him. And he worked at Hughes Aircraft. And he said, how'd you like to meet Howard Hughes? And so I said, I'd love to. Howard Hughes was sitting at the bar. You would have thought he was a wino. I mean, I remember him wearing khaki pants, tennis shoes, and I forgot the kind of shirt he's wearing. And then my friend takes me over and he says, Mr. Hughes, I work for you, and I'd like you to meet my friend David Siegel. And he said, what do you do? And I said, well, I'm an electronic technician. I said,
sounded good.
I don't want to say I was a lineman, an electronic technician, and I'd like to go to work for your company. He said, well, okay. And he writes down the name of a woman. He said, you go see this woman, and you tell her I sent you, and that you will you'll be at first in line because we got a lot of applicants. So I go to Hughes Aircraft, and I go there, and the first question she says, have you had trigonometry? I didn't even know what trigonometry was. I said, no. She said, well, I'm sorry, but you're not qualified to be an electronic technician if you didn't have trigonometry. So that blew that off. Well, a friend of mine in Miami had a friend who was a doorman at a hotel in New York who had a friend who worked for Warner Brothers, guy named Hugh Benson, worked for Warner Brothers as a vice president of advertising and public relations. And he said, if you're ever in California and you're looking for a job, go see Hugh Benson. So before I left to California, I decided I would go see Hugh Benson. So I go to, it's a 2 seats in a 2-story building, and right next to him is like the big arch where you drive in to the lot off the main street. So I go to there's a security guard downstairs, and there's like a balcony on the 2nd floor, and the offices are up, and there's a stairwell to go up along the left. So I go up to the desk, and I said, I didn't have an appointment or anything. I said, I'd like to see Hugh Benson. And he says, do you have an appointment? I said, no. Well, Mr. Benson won't see anybody without an appointment. He was the big shots. So I said, well, will you call him up and tell him? Now, I didn't even know the guy in New York, but I knew his name. But I said, will you tell him that a friend of whatever the guy's name was, I can't remember, is here to see him? Well, the card says, okay, but it won't help you, or something like that. So he calls up, he said, Mr. Benson, I got a David Siegel here, and he's a friend of whatever the guy in New York is, the doorman in New York. And I hear, because it was just like up, his office is off the balcony, I hear, well, send him right up. And he meets me halfway up the steps, and he's so happy to see me, and he how is Joe Blow doing? He's just doing great. He sends his regards and all. And on his door it said Vice President of Advertising and Public Relations. And so I go in, and he said, and how can I help you? And I said, well, I go to the University of Miami, and I'm studying advertising and public relations, and I thought I could get a job with you. And he said, well, we have a strict rule here at Warner Brothers that everybody has to start in the mailroom. And then they get orientated, and they meet all the different divisions and everything. And then from the mailroom, they can get appointed to, and they had one show, Maverick, back then. So I said, okay, that's okay with me. So he takes me to the personnel office, and he says, I'd like you to take an application from Mr. Siegel. And the girl said, Mr. Benson, we have 10,000 applications. Apparently everybody that went to California to get in the movies, everybody wanted to get in the movie, would go work for the studio so they would get discovered, you know. And so he said, put his application in front. So I filled it out, and they put it in front. And a few days later, I get a phone call. You have been selected to come to work for us. Now, I'm making $150 a week, which is a lot of money back in the 50s.
Is that with being an electrician or at Warner Brothers?
No, 150 a week was that I was making at the Southern Cal Edison as a lineman.
As a lineman, okay.
And that was a lot of money back then. So they called me up, and they said, can you come in Monday and start work? Oh, yes, thank you so much. Oh, by the way, how much do you pay? And they said $70 a week. I said, I can't afford to live. My expense. I had a nice apartment. I think I can't afford it. Now, had I gone to work at Warner Brothers, I know I would have ended up as the chairman of the board of Time Warner. Had I gone to work, taking that job. So there's a situation. I mean, I'm glad everything worked out, but there's an opportunity that I missed because I was worrying more about money. Money is should not.
So I met. I was in Chicago one time, and I shared a cab with this lady, and I'm there. It's snowing, and I said, "Where are you heading to?" And this was off the outskirts of downtown Chicago, and she said, Trump Tower. And I said, well, I'm going to Trump Tower too. I said, do you want to share a cab together? So we're in the cab, and I said, so how long are you staying at Trump? And she says, well, I actually have a condo there. And here I make a chauvinistic statement, and I say, "So what does your husband do?" And she said, "It's not my husband, thank you." And she said, "It's me." I said, "I'm sorry." I said, "Just stupid male comment." And I said, "What's your name?" And her name was Miss Fields. She was the CEO of McDonald's. But she
What's
told
her
me,
name?
Miss Fields. I forgot her first
Fields?
name. Fields. But she started at the counter at McDonald's. So just like you talked about the mailroom, she started at the counter of McDonald's and worked her way up. And so, David, I think we're going to have to do a part 3 because we've already done 25 minutes and people don't want to listen more than 25. But your story, I think people would listen for 2 hours.
I haven't even begun.
You haven't even become a sheriff
I'm
yet.
not even. No, I'm not.
And
Yeah,
wait, how much
well,
longer? We're gonna come back to this, but how much longer did he become a sheriff?
I mean, we're at. I'm only 21 years old.
We got 60 more years to go. And so tune in next time after this one, because you're going to hear from David. Obviously, he didn't take the job at Warner, where he probably would have been the CEO or chairman. But then he's going to become a sheriff, and we know he's the timeshare king, the largest independent timeshare owner in the world. And I want to talk to you next time about not only getting to that point, but some of the things. I remember one of the hardest times of my life was 2008, and now that we're at COVID, it's like a repeat. I mean, it's almost exactly the same. This 2020 feels like 2009. It's a perfect storm. We have COVID, we have the election, we have businesses shut down, and all these different things. And so,
except I was leveraged back then. I'm not leveraged now.
So you're smart.
That's the difference.
But anyhow, join us for it's going to be part 3, and I think there may be a part 4. So tune in.
5 or 6.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.